County Board Workshop, December 3rd, 2019, Affordable Housing Opportunities and Resource Alignment.
So we're going to go ahead and get started. I know that Mary Jo's on her way back, and that'll give us the opportunity to get around the room. I'm Tony Carter, Ramsey County Commissioner. We'll go around and come back to Mary Jo.
Nicole Fretham, Commissioner District 1. Victoria Reinhardt, Commissioner District 7.
Jim McDonough, County Commissioner District 6.
Trista Mattis-Castillo, Commissioner District 3.
We'll go around here, come back to Mary Jo, and then we'll go to County Manager and introduce their.
Dustin, District Mattis-Castillo's office.
Matt Hill, Commissioner Carter's office.
Start back.
Francis Oyama, Community Corrections.
The emergency at both.
Rick Conlon with Community and Economic Development.
Josh Olson, Community Economic Development.
Hi, Jennifer O'Rourke, Government Relations.
Mark Ritzfeld, Ramsey County Health and Wellness Admin.
Joseph DeSemco, Ramsey County Health and Wellness Admin.
Sue Sutter, NGCI Admin.
Janelle White, Controller, Health and Wellness Service Team.
Maria Weatherall, Ramsey County Veteran Services.
Chris Samuel, County Auditor Treasurer.
Shannon Brandler, Secretary.
Anya Malik, Health and Wellness Admin. Lydia Health. Carissa Black, Public Health.
Mary Lou Egan, Community and Economic Development.
Martha Faust, Community and Economic Development.
Lee Schmidt, County Attorney's Office. Jane Catherine, County Manager's Office.
So without, and Mary Jo McGuire, County Commissioner District 2. Thank you, and I don't want to take much time except to say that this is an exciting opportunity to share back on affordable housing opportunities and resource alignment in Ramsey County. There's much work that's been going on as represented in the packet that we have today. I would like to turn this over to the County Manager, then introduce those who are here with us to present.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Exciting topic today that builds off of conversations that started, I'll say they started during the budget process and then continued through it. I think they've been with us beyond the budget process, but they came to the forefront through the budget process as a part of where our conversations lie and where to go. Although through the Community-Based Economic Development Division, as it started up, the work in that space of thinking about the role in economic development, how we've heard even from Greater MSP, housing is such a key asset as a part of our region's ability to attract and retain talent as we move forward. And then thinking about how that needs to intersect with our emergency services side of the organization, where we know we are the safety net provider, and counties provide roles in that space that there are no other individuals or entities providing. In our commissioner-led discussion we had a few months ago, part of the follow-up was talking about, how do we think about our role across policy, funding, and programs without being duplicative and while doing the most good, I would say at a high level. How do you have the most bang for your investments across those different areas? We've spent a lot of time working through this. Carrie has spent a ton of time thinking about timelines and statutes requiring different movements. And then we need to think about all this in the context as well of last week's budget hearing and the entire conversation of compounding levy impacts and what does it mean on the communities we're trying to serve, and the pernicious side of property taxes where in one attempt to help you can make housing more unaffordable in another way. And that's just a piece that's been a dynamic for us as we think about this work. I'll leave the rest to the workshop, but I hope this helps to further our direction that goes beyond even 2020 into 2021 and beyond. And I'm going to go straight to Carrie.
All right, thank you so much,
Carrie, if you'll introduce the other
presenters. I'm Carrie Collins. I'm Community and Economic Development Director. And
I'm Max Holders. I'm the Interim Manager of Housing Stability and Health and Wellness.
And I'd just like to say that what a unique opportunity to be partnering with Max on this so that we can start to look at the full housing continuum, which we'll talk about in a moment. And Joanna.
Joanna Berg, Deputy County Manager. And I think in the interest of time, let's just go straight to Carrie.
So I'd just like to start off and add that this presentation was put together, Max and I worked on it, but Chris Samuel was also a key partner in this as well, and he knows this stuff in and out. So if there are any specific questions about tax collection, he is here and available. We have been talking about affordable housing throughout 2019, as County Manager alluded to. We talked about it most specifically this past September, which led us here to today. However, we started 2019 with having a thoughtful conversation around affordable housing, and Max led that presentation. We've talked about it as a key component within our economic development workshop, It has also been a huge priority in our major redevelopment projects, and it has led us to carve out a strong piece of our economic competitiveness and inclusion vision plan, which we'll undertake in 2020. A big piece of that will be a housing assessment, which allows us to understand what our housing inventory is in Ramsey County. What type of product are we missing? What types of services are we missing? And better understand where we can better align resources moving forward. So during September 17th, we had a commissioner-led discussion on affordable housing, and thank you. And at that time, we identified some funds, and there's an RDA that's working through the system for mid-December. That includes a partnership with the NOAA Impact Fund that will allow us to play a stronger role when it comes to preserving naturally occurring affordable housing. But we also need to talk about what our role is going to be generally when it comes to affordable housing, both on the service side and supply side. And so we can walk through that. Let's talk a little bit about the housing continuum and where the county currently has programming and services.
So this graphic is really a broad depiction of what a housing continuum is. The county doesn't play a piece in each thing that's bulleted here. For example, Section 8, which I would actually put into subsidized housing rather than supportive housing, is administered by both the Met Council in the suburbs here and the Public Housing Authority in the cities. So we won't discuss that one today. But as we see, we move from emergency housing on one side, and really that starts with unsheltered folks who are outside camping, living in caves, living in lean-tos, and that where we participate there is through our outreach contracts. And moving into the future, we also hope to participate in the cleanup and abatement and how those two interact. And then we also participate in through the funding of shelters, both direct contracts to a shelter provider, but also through the funds that we administer through Heading Home Ramsey as well. So we think about Catholic Charities' major footprint in downtown St. Paul, the Safe Space. That's on the emergency housing side. On the
yes, go ahead.
And I'm not the wordsmither on this one.
yeah.
But what you just said, and what I was going to call this out, and I really appreciate you said it. Instead of homeless and shelters, I really think we need to just say unsheltered and sheltered. They're both homeless. There's different approaches. But you said it exactly what it is, sheltered and unsheltered, and we need to call it out really clearly so that everybody really understands here. There isn't a difference between homeless and shelters. But there is a difference between unsheltered and sheltered.
Thank you.
And we see that tension between the two and helping people go from unsheltered to shelter is kind of that first step along the continuum as well. So, and then as we move into supportive housing, we can think of this as our housing support, or GRH, transitional housings, housing with services. So a lot of times we have it's an apartment unit or a group setting that also requires, the individual requires deeper mental health, or maybe they have a disability, or maybe they're aging, and that requires an additional level of services as well. So on this side of the continuum, we see about the county either making about $16 million in grant pass-through funds administered by the county. So that could be a HUD grant, that could be our state FHPAP, that could be our housing support that we're administering. And then we use about $1.6 million in levy on this side. So we're leveraging a lot of grant and pass-through funding on this side. And then as we move into more of our subsidized housing units, so that could be rental subsidies, and there's a lot of this can be debated, but subsidized housing we can call this rental subsidized housing in this area. And we can use our CDBG and home funds for some of this. It's a very small amount. So our total CDBG and home together is about $1.6 million, and not all of those activities are housing eligible. So not everything is going to be focused on housing like those $1.6 million. And some of that leads to longer term stability as well. So as we think about down payment assistance or weatherization of folks' homes as well. I would say those are also subsidized activities, but they're more in that home ownership realm, which can lead to long-term stability there. And this isn't, the goal of a housing continuum isn't to move everyone towards home ownership. It's to match what people's needs are and their affordability levels into the best location for them. So someone who has the deep need of services, their long-term goal is not going to be home ownership over the term of their life maybe, but to make sure that they have a place that they can, they feel stabilized and they can afford would be long-term housing stability for them. And so I want to call that out as we're not, that our vision is not to move everyone to home ownership. And for some people, just a market rate apartment might be really home ownership stable as well. For others, yeah, and for myself, it would be to own a home eventually, so.
So two things, and I'll admit up front, because one of the questions may call it out. I have not looked through the PowerPoint, and so you might get to it. But I mean, you called it out. Why is Section 8 in supportive housing when it really is a subsidized housing? Because there isn't a lot of supports that go with Section 8. It really is subsidized housing.
Yeah, I think it was just, I don't think there's, I think it just got put in the wrong category,
Yeah.
so I called it out right away.
Yeah.
And then, and I know this is like broad,
Yeah.
right? But, and I don't know if you get into it deeper, but, I look at rental subsidies and how we can use money and be effective, and right away you go to, buying down rents, and that can be really costly, but there's some really inexpensive ways of subsidies, like just landlord guarantees that prove it really effective, right? Are we getting those deeper lists of what various levels of subsidies might look like and what we can actually buy with dollars and help us weigh in the decision-making of where to put dollars? Because, there are some things kind of looking backwards that are always kind of the go-to things, but looking forwards, I think, we've got to get as creative as we can with the question.
And I think to build off that question, I think one of the things that prevents people from moving from this continuum is the barriers. And we've talked about that before, whether that's incarceration, income, mental health, they have an eviction from a previous apartment, all those types of barriers can help prevent people from moving through this. And so there are programs that we're dabbling with now, for example, Beyond Backgrounds, which is offering a landlord guarantee for taking someone who has additional barriers. If those prove to be successful, that might be an area of expansion that might be more cost effective than rental subsidy voucher or something like that.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. Commissioner Rand?
And I know that we're going to get into the naturally occurring affordable housing. But I think that is something that is not, an individual subsidy, but something that brings more value to the community as a whole, and how we can support that, so.
I do have to.
Yes, Commissioner.
Because I think that's a really important piece of this, because so much of our affordable housing is actually naturally occurring, and it's not just the big apartment complexes that the NOAA fund, it's really the housing in the east side, Frogtown, North End, that becomes affordable by default, right? And most of that, unless you've got a really responsible landlord, so much of that is not livable conditions.
Right.
And we check a box and we think we've got people living in affordable housing, but if we don't recognize that one of the biggest problems we have is we have huge population living in substandard housing, rodents, mildew. I mean, I could, an East Sider, a good friend of mine, was renting, and he wanted to actually find a cheaper place to rent so that he could save money to buy a down payment for a house, right? Not very sophisticated, didn't grow up with a dad to help him figure things out, so he found a cheaper place to rent, right? Didn't realize it, but there was no furnace in that house. The landlord put electric heaters in every single room, right? He gets his first Excel bill in December, and it's like $2,300. So this poor guy who's trying to do the right thing, and he ends up, way more overloaded. So, when we talk about NOAA housing, there's two types of NOAA housing. There's the quality, affordable, that we need to protect and preserve and grow, and there's this huge stockpile of miserable that none of us would live in, and we shouldn't expect anybody to live in. We need to have conversations about strategies.
So that's
actually what I was referencing too is, you can't, just because there's a roof over the head doesn't mean that it's a place we would want to live.
So particularly as we get to the NOAA housing, we're going to talk about quality, affordable housing. Thank you.
There we go. So thank you. I think as we head into existing programs on the supply side, I will just echo those comments and say what you just demonstrated is that there's substantial need in all sorts of aspects along the continuum. And you know, just from developing affordable housing, it takes between 8 to 10 funding sources to make it happen, and that's just on the unit supply side. And then all of the need when it comes to, you know, naturally occurring affordable housing for both single-family homes and rental. There's just so much work to be done, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. Just kind of a refresher on our existing programs, as Max suggested, we do get about 1.6 in federal entitlement funds, both between the community development block grant funds and the home funds. And so this talks a little bit about how CDBG can be used for housing. However, it's not necessarily a housing program. It is supposed to be intended to use to facilitate affordable housing, but it also can be used for infrastructure repair. It can be used for job creation. Really, it's intended to serve entities in low-income census tracts, or serve a organization or a company that has a low-income clientele. So that can be any number of things. It does, at times, can be used for naturally occurring affordable housing, and so we try to kind of broaden the use of CDBG funds.
Commissioner Massey.
Thanks. On the CDBG funds, if we are, receiving funds and can be used in multiple ways, do we have an internal policy on like buckets that we're going to demonstrate? How is that decided from Ramsey County side?
We are required through HUD to put together our 5-year plan, and that indicates priorities and goals, and I believe, I'll look to Mary Lou, but that does get approved by the HRA.
The 5-year plan itself doesn't get approved by the HRA, but each year there's an action plan that's part of that, and that gets approved by the HRA about what's going to be spent each year.
And then moving on to home funds, that is intended to facilitate supply. However, being as though of the 1.6, 1.2 is in the CDBG bucket or so, we get $400,000 to $500,000 a year to use for affordable housing, and that, as we know, doesn't go very far. However, we are able to, add additional units here and there for projects that are happening. I want to stress that the CDBG and home can only be used in suburban Ramsey County. St. Paul gets their own CDBG and home allotment, and so we're kind of restricted as far as what we can do in St. Paul.
Commissioner Reinhardt.
Go back. Okay, so assuming that we eventually get housing in our Mills property, does this mean that, and not that we would, I'm just trying to understand the last line there. So because we own it, none of the funds could be used for housing on the property because we own it? No. No? Okay.
No.
I think, Mary Lou, you can express this, but it can't be used for a public facility. Is essentially it. Yes.
Okay.
So you can't use it to build a public library, or, it can't be self-serving.
Oh, for a property that we're going to use. Okay,
Yes.
I thought
Yeah.
it was that we owned the property and therefore we could, okay, gotcha.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
My apologies, but, and I know you know a lot of this, but I just want to make sure as we're moving forward on this, that we're getting into, again, looking forward and not looking backwards. And, on down payment assistance for first-time home buyers, this is one area, again, where I think because, I'll tell you the story of my son, right? I mean, he was paying $1,300 a month for him and the money to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. I helped him with a $8,000 down payment. He got a townhouse that they both could go live in, and taxes, insurance, and principal was $800 a month. They saved $500 a month.
Wow.
Right? But it's not just the down payment assistance that can really help families out. A lot of families that are in this situation bump up against a credit score or a barrier to get that mortgage. And it just kills me every day knowing people are paying $1,200-1,300 renting, and right now in this market they could actually own something and pay a lot less. And so it's not just the down payment assistance, but how can we really help some of these folks get in I don't know what a guarantee looks like, or how do we help with credit score issues on the barrier to get the loan, but that opens up huge, again, trying to, benefit as many people as possible with the limited money we have, the limited resources, and to me, that's an area that we really thought that through a little bit more, could really open up a lot of doors for individuals and families.
And Commissioner McDonough, I'll just respond to that and just say, when I worked more closely with the current population in southeast Roseville, the Brittany Marion Apartments, which is home to one of the largest refugee populations, was subpar housing, as you mentioned, and still is.
And they're shutting it
And
down.
they took their
shut it down
license.
last month.
Took their license.
They took their license, and so that they could make those improvements. Working with the International Institute in resettlement services, it was a really hard balance, as you mentioned, because refugees coming in, they have to develop credit. And so oftentimes, unless you have a credit score, they won't take you, and that was one of the few places where they would take them. And so it's kind of balancing those places, but I think you're absolutely correct in that, what types of guarantee programs, what kinds of things can the county play to reduce that risk up front is an important piece of the conversation.
As well as financial literacy as embedded part of the work that we do.
At this point in time, if you want to take the 11 by 17 that was included, if you have it, otherwise there should be an 11 by 17. Oh, it looks like you've got an 8.5 by 11. If not, okay. But I'll just talk about the kind of the highlights here from this table from the Minnesota Housing Partnership. They've identified key funding partners at 30%, 30 to 50% AMI, and 50 to 60% AMI, the full continuum of housing. And I just kind of pulled out the highlights. Counties are identified as a necessary funder, both as a capital funder, a service funder, and a rental assistance and operating funder across every continuum, with the exception of 60 to 80%. And this just goes to show exactly, commissioners, what you described as far as the need for both cities and counties and Met Council and nonprofit agencies, Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, to be a part of this larger collective that helps to facilitate services and supply across all of those stops of AMI. I think it's a really good illustration of that. So if you need an 11 by 17, there are some going around here, but I think this is just kind of the general macro level idea of who should be involved at each stop along the way, with the goal of the 2020 vision plan and the housing assessment to drill down to say, who are the players in Ramsey County, and where are we missing when it comes to all of these AMI ranges?
I see some global chart.
This is really well.
Thank you.
Now, you've seen this before for other purposes. However, let's talk a little bit about levy authority and what that means for Ramsey County. I think this was not necessarily well understood when I first arrived, and it certainly was news to me that Ramsey County had an HRA levy authority, but just historically has not levied. This is an important piece of the narrative because our peer counties are levying. They are levying for affordable housing, they are levying for economic development, for redevelopment efforts. Some have county-owned housing, some levy throughout several different levy authorities, and we have been absent. And so the programs that we can offer are limited to the federal entitlement programs and then the grant programs that are coming through health and wellness as well.
Excuse me.
Yep.
Here. And as you think about the absence of a levy from Ramsey County, there are absent matching opportunities as well. I don't recall seeing those outlined here, but is that the work that you're doing as we look forward to the vision plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Commissioner Reinhardt and then Aguirre.
I just wanted to comment that I think it's important because you said it already, but I want to repeat it, is that we already have that authority. The EDA that we were looking at the legislature required additional legislation and the ability to levy under that. But right now, we have the authority under today, under this.
Thank you. Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you for that clarification, Commissioner Reinhardt, because I was just going to ask the question if we're, and maybe you're going to come to this, are we thinking of going for EDA or, authority, or, where are we at with that with our cities?
So you're going to.
Let me just advance the
You should,
slide.
okay, yeah, thanks. Thank you.
So CED suggested approach, activate HRA levy, and why is that? So as Commissioner Reinhardt mentioned, there was an attempt several years ago to seek special legislation for an economic development authority. And the intentions were spot on. I think in the absence of a very formal program outline, it caused some skepticism from our city partners. And that was an important piece because it did require all of the cities to opt in at that time. There was enough miscommunication, misunderstanding throughout that time that the county decided to withdraw that request, and led to a number of efforts to get economic development kind of better aligned. So at this time, now that we kind of understand, the world that we're living in right now is that we are in an affordable housing crisis, and we have an HRA levy that's currently within our authority to activate. There are some nuances to that we'll discuss in a moment, but our suggested approach is there's enough to do. There's clearly enough to do to align resources for affordable housing and redevelopment. Redevelopment is a key piece of this because Ramsey County is a fully built out county. We don't have a lot of greenfield, we don't have a whole lot of undeveloped land. Even in terms of Rice Creek Commons, that's redevelopment as well. There are existing buildings on there. So we are a fully redeveloped community, which means that when we go to activate an HRA, that we can use it for both affordable housing and for the removal of blight, and to help aging commercial corridors, or to help our businesses that are in need of a facelift. And so there's a lot that you can do to activate the HRA levy. As demonstrated through Minnesota Housing Partnership's Housing Continuum, it takes both cities and counties working together to make a dent in affordable housing, along with our partner organizations. We need to have program offerings that either complement what the cities are doing or fill a gap where there are missing services along the full spectrum. There's a levy authority in place for most of suburban Ramsey County. We'll talk a little bit about the communities that would be exempt to this. That's a big piece of the conversation. The goal is to activate the levy authority that exists, keeping in mind that an economic development authority does have the most flexible use of funds. And you can use it for affordable housing, you can use it for business attraction and retention and expansion, which is why it's typically the most desirable type of authority. But that's something that we believe in community economic development should be our long-term strategy. But just using the authority that we have right now, building out the programming with the vision plan really steering our direction, there's plenty to do right now in the short term.
May I call on Brian?
Thanks, Madam Chair. So let me just try and restate this part a little bit more as we dive into it. So the goal today was to develop a suite of options along a continuum to discuss with the board of potential paths forward that are both realistic under the statute and also address issues related to timeliness, likelihood of passage, moving it forward. There's not one magic perfect area. This was actually the most challenging part to build out for this workshop, and at the same time, I think what Carrie's trying to say is, so there's going to be 3 ideas here. We do have a preferred staff approach that tries to balance those needs and weighs them, but that's the evaluation piece we're going to walk into on the coming slides.
Sounds good. Thank you.
So this is a little text heavy, but I wanted you to understand the full extent of what a HRA can be used for. Housing, affordable housing. Redevelopment, it's really for the reduction of blight. And so, there is a blight test, and there's plenty of cleanup and redevelopment opportunities that our cities would love to pounce on if there were funds available to do that. So Ramsey County by the numbers, and then we'll talk about a little bit of the timing. Now, before we get into this, there are exempt communities from our HRA, and the year threshold is 1971. Right now, we would have the authority to activate our existing Housing and Redevelopment Authority at a percentage of 0.0185 per statute. And we would be able to do that for those communities that created an HRA after 1971. The communities that have HRAs that we are aware of include the city of St. Paul. So that is 50% of Ramsey County tax base. North St. Paul, New Brighton, the records are unclear at this time, and White Bear Lake. So if we looked at what does that mean, building out the 2020 vision plan and getting the city of St. Paul to partner with us, that would mean about $10.5 million of levy dollars. Without the exempt cities, and suburban HRA levy would be about 4.2.
So you said that those who created before 1971 could be exempt or would be?
They could be.
They could be exempt.
They would need to opt in,
right,
essentially.
And then, are there any who created HRAs after 1971, which appear on this list, and they are not exempt? So they would have their HRA and would also be covered by an HRA, by our HRA.
Absolutely. I think most cities in Ramsey County do have some form of HRA or an EDA. And so this would essentially complement what they can do.
So if they have an EDA, does that exempt, are they considered one and the same as far as exemptions? That's my first question. Okay. So if they have an HRA, well, we've got those that are exempted. So, or could be, I should say. If they choose not to opt in, so they don't, I live in White Bear Lake, I wouldn't be charged the levy. Does that mean that only the communities that opt in get any money?
Yes.
Commissioner Castillo, and then
I just want to talk through that a little bit more, because in this case, they would have to choose to opt out because they're in, right? Is that how it reads? It would be a choice to opt out. But let's say St. Paul opted out, they didn't want to be part of it. Then, or they stayed in, right? We levied in St. Paul. Can we spend the money in St. Paul, even though they have their own HRA?
Yep. So for clarity, those communities that are exempt would need to take formal action by mid-year, July of, we'll say, 2020 or 2021, and we'll talk about timing, and they would need to formally opt into this levy. Those communities don't need that currently have HRAs created after 1971. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to pass a resolution of support. They wouldn't be able to opt out. And for those communities that are either participating because we suddenly activated or choose to participate, those dollars will be spent in those communities.
Thank you.
Yep.
So the current, and that's just the levy dollars, because we have the federal funds that would continue to be used in just the suburbs because St. Paul has its own allocation of those funds. That can get really messy.
Well,
as far as which funds would be used where.
Well, these funds would not be commingled.
Right,
yes.
I get that.
Yes, yes.
but all of the funds collected from a levy that Ramsey County would levy, for example, St. Paul, would have to be used in St. Paul, is that what you're saying?
No, it goes into the larger pot, so the 10.5, and because St. Paul is 50% of the tax base, you would certainly want parity between how you're using those funds to ensure that St. Paul is. Yeah, no.
Madam Chair, just on clarity, but if a city opted out, we would not create a freeloader problem where they would then receive levy funds in their community from an HRA levy when they were not having their residents contribute to it. So it's more on the negative side to it that becomes an issue.
Okay. Oh, we haven't done all the language yet? Go ahead, Jim. We're just testing the language here. Go ahead.
But I think eyes wide open, The more folks that are a part of this from the get-go, the better, right? And part of this is kind of driving trust and relationship. There's gonna have to be some understanding everybody's benefiting from what they're putting into the pot as we develop trust and relationship about broader and bigger uses moving forward. And so part of that's gonna be recognizing that at least for the time, whatever we would choose to do and how successful we're at it, is recognizing that communities that are, especially the ones that have the choice, are gonna need to feel like they're gonna get their share back. And then we build the trust moving forward that eventually it's a county-wide piece that is responsive to all the communities as issues arise.
Commissioner McDonough, if I might respond to that, that's why the vision plan is so critical to this conversation, because the housing assessment is one thing to understand housing by the numbers as far as the matrix that we've discussed before as far as who's doing what, but also our city partners are going to be a huge part of the engagement piece of this vision plan in helping us define and refine recommendations as far as how future funds will be used. So it should be no surprise as far as how these funds will be used, and it should be no surprise that a levy option is what will come out.
Okay, Commissioner McGuire. I'm trying to just make sure I understand this. So if a community, for example, if a community doesn't want affordable housing in their community, they would maybe opt out of having this because they don't want any dollars to be used in their community for any of these types of work, or the city is still zoned for this stuff, right? So we can't do anything in a community, even if we have the right to and we're levying in their community and everything, we're still working with that community with their zoning and everything to put this in, right? So if a community doesn't want something to happen, they can zone their way out of it, even though they're a part of the levy, or no? Just help me in
There are, the only entities that could opt out are the ones described.
Okay.
Theoretically, we will have identify all sorts of programs. I would say, from my perspective, most cities will be chomping at the bits to find resources to help alleviate the pressure on the cities to gap out a lot of those programs. If there's a community that doesn't want to take advantage of the programs, then that's up to them. But I would say most communities will be
one.
Absolutely.
And I imagine that cities would want to use this tool to meet their projected affordable housing need, as suggested by the Metropolitan Council as well.
So
I was going to suggest, Carrie, as you go into this, ideally, we could maybe lay out all three, because your last slide has some implications on timing about why, and if you could get through the 4 slides, I think it helps. I made the mistake of not letting her get through them when I did this, so I'm trying to learn from my own mistake on this part.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm sorry, Commissioner Feckham.
I just had a question about what role cities would play in helping us determine how to use those funds more formally or informally.
So there will be an implementation aspect of the vision plan, and with very tangible recommendations that then go into program creation. So then the idea is that the county, in partnership with the city partners, develop what programs make sense. Because most of the communities have an HRA or an EDA, they won't want us to necessarily duplicate those programs, and they might, because their funds only go so far. And we want to understand what the needs of each community are. Ramsey County, the needs are so different depending on where you're at, and so we won't be able to necessarily tailor a program for every community, but to hear where the greatest needs are, they will be at the table helping to define those.
Thank you. We're going to let you get through this.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we've identified some timing. So in the event that the board has consensus on this direction, the most aggressive approach would be that those communities mentioned, so St. Paul, North St. Paul, and White Bear Lake, and maybe New Brighton, would need to opt in by July 1st of 2020, so 6 months away here. And the first HRA levy taxes would be collected in 2021. That is the most aggressive approach, and there are some concerns, and this should not necessarily come as a surprise, but The intent on the vision plan is to do a significant amount of engagement with our city partners to understand the needs of the community, to do a housing assessment, and we're looking at the 2020 being the year to do that analysis and to make recommendations with the goal of going around at the end of 2020 with our commissioners to help the city councils understand what we learned. And I really see the value in that, leading us into the levy decisions.
Commissioner? Okay. The way I'm reading that and what I thought I heard you say don't jive for me. So those communities that could be exempted, they have to choose to use that exemption, which is opting out, correct? Rather than opting in?
They will need to pass a resolution that describes their intent with the HRA levy. So I think you can.
So regardless, they have to do something proactively. It just doesn't, okay, if you don't opt out, you are in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
But the others don't have an option?
Yep, we just move forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about another timeline then.
The concerns also include staff capacity. With increased programs, we're going to need additional staff. And I think it's wonderful we have Max now in his interim role, and we're starting to kind of build out this kind of housing piece, but we're going to need to align staff around future programs and how we spend those levy dollars. So
It's the most aggressive.
that is the most aggressive. So staff recommended is that we get through 2020 with the vision plan and we identify where the recommendations are. That at the first quarter of 2021, we go around and visit all of our communities and give a presentation about the larger vision plan. And I think they'll be very interested in learning some of the data that we learn. Then July 1st of 2021 is when those communities would need to say yes to the levy, with tax collection being 2022. This is the most advantageous because it allows us to do the vision plan. We've done our engagement. We can better assess what staffing needs. We'll need to partner with those resources. And then also it coincides with our budgeting process so that we can understand what this means for the larger community budget as well. Just a little bit about EDAs too. I said it's the most flexible use of funds. I do think that this should be the county's long-term strategy. And assuming we can activate the HRA and, for all purposes, especially equity considerations, a countywide levy makes a whole lot of sense. But then we can seek legislation, as early as 2022 or 2023 to broaden the use of funds. But with the vision plan in hand, there will be no secrets as to how those funds will be used. And it might even be far more advantageous for our city partners to say, yes, we actually have a lot of needs when it comes to all of these other programs, so please partner with us on that. So I do still think that the EDA is the better option, and in fact there are some communities that preserve both HRA and EDA authority for various reasons, but that still is a big piece of this as well.
Right now.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out how because I can see communities if we go forward, and first of all, I think the staff recommendation makes the most sense. Trying to rush something is what caused us problems the last time. So, and even with HRA, because we had that discussion before too, what can we do, and just going out and just trying to not get all the information that we needed for it. But if we do the HRA and we're going for an EDA at the same time, I guess my question is, are we better off just going for the EDA? And can we do any housing within the EDA? Do we need them separated, or do we want to go with what we really want?
Well, it depends on approach. The suggested approach is the HRA because the suburban communities, you just activate that levy authority, and we've certainly talked a lot about affordable housing in 2019, and to get them comfortable with that approach. I really advocate for a staggered approach because I don't want to resurrect old EDA feelings right now.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
That's the only piece I wanted to clarify, Madam Chair, was
Yeah.
it's not a at the same time layered approach. It's actually implement the HRA, have the vision plan in hand, but quickly then soon thereafter, and we're trying to be transparent, open a dialogue with communities to say, we think there are opportunities to better support what you continue to tell us in this vision plan in areas where we're limited by the current tool. But now that we've built some trust and buy-in, we would like to do that collectively. And candidly, I mean, the concern of an EDA is one community could, in theory, create a challenge at the legislature for implementation. And so we just don't know if we've bought enough trust at this point to move down that road.
And understandable. Commissioner
Yes.
Castillo and
I love how staff is very good at advocating for what they want. And I want to just push back. As we've laid out, we have concerns listed for the aggressive approach, but we don't have concerns about other approaches. And I just want to raise one, is that if we don't take the aggressive approach, and I want to make sure everyone understands what that means, is that before we're going to have any dollars ready to go for housing, we're talking 2023 by going with the staff plan. So I just want everyone to know that that's what we're agreeing to, is that we know that we have this urgent need, but this is a long timeline. This is a slow approach, and so I just want everyone to be comfortable with that and to call that out. And in that nature, I would hope that if we're going with a staff recommended longer approach, that at this time that we're putting the levy into effect, we're also doing a RFP for proposals, so the moment we have money, we can get projects out the door, so we don't go to 2025 to get. So I just want to call that out.
Commissioner McDonough, McGuire, or did I do it?
So, after Trista's comments, to yours, we've got, I think, a fair amount of trust with our suburban and all the cities, right? But we really stubbed our toe bad last time when we tried this. And so there's a lot of work to do to build the trust. Not so much that we can't get there, I feel we can really get there, but we've got to earn it a little bit. So, doing the HRA in this recommended approach, I feel strongly that sets us up for that stage. And then staging the EDA conversation to start, once we've got that demonstrated trust, we can start moving down that path fairly quickly. Trista, to your point, there's nobody on this board, I wish we had an EDA already, right? I really do. And it kills me just to think that this recommendation is going to kick us out, a couple of years. Two things on that. One, I go back to, we still got to earn the trust. But the other piece, and it's a part of this, and I was going to call it out, but the other big piece of this, and we just heard about it, a week ago Monday. If we bring in $10 million of new money, there's not a percentage increase in the HRA. Well, there is, but it's 4 to 5% increase in our county collection, right? That's a big hit for our taxpayers. And we got to be thinking, and I was, Ryan, how do we prepare our regular budget to be able to grab this opportunity and fill that void? But we can't go in with a 10, 12% increase the year we do this. We have to have time to prepare our budget so that 1 year, that budget is prepared, or the increase for that budget to support that budget. And all the work we talked about just an hour and a half ago doesn't get slowed down. We don't pause, but we can't overburden the people that are going to be paying for all this in 1 year. And that's the other reason why I think, just getting this right. Moving too fast last time and really taught me that in this one, some patience is going to pay off long term. The need is here now, but it's going to pay off long term. One, being successful, and I think we get to an EDA fairly quickly because all the trust happens in divisioning and how we set this up. The HRA is just a stage to get to the ED. But the biggest piece for me, and I think, recognize around this table, what happens the year we implement $10 million of new money coming into this county? And what's the effect on the rest of it? We got to prepare for that. And we need that.
Thank you. Commissioner McGuire.
Thanks, and I'll just echo a little bit about what's being said, and I think we all want to move faster on this, but for those of you that weren't here, and I know Trista, you were here for, one of our cities actually passed a resolution against us doing this. So it was it was hard then, because it really hurt us getting any legislation done, and so sometimes we do just need to be a little more patient, and we've all talked about how we want to move faster, you know, at these things, but I think right now I'll just echo that I'm gonna trust our staff, because Carrie, you know these communities as well as anyone, what their appetite would be for this, and so as long as we can be ready, as Commissioner Manis-Castillo said, be ready right when we need to be. I think we do need to do it in a timely manner. So, and then, yeah. So thanks. And thank you, Commissioner Putnam.
And I just want to push back. I know you said something about already having trust in our suburban communities, and I'll say a lot of my communities, that trust isn't there.
Yeah.
So it is going to take time to rebuild that trust with our cities and really fully invest in and understand their needs and how the county can actually be a communicative partner for them to trust before we ask more of them.
For that pushback. And indeed, the vision plan helps us to understand the needs that are out there and to hear communication from those cities as well. County Manager.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. And you're having much of the same conversation we've had in the build-up to today. And so I just want to acknowledge it's not as though we're having dissimilar conversations, at least in the run-up. And, you know, I think in a perfect world, even pushing toward July and putting in a lot of effort, if you're just looking at it through an economic development department lens, feels like it might be doable, and we may even be able to do that. And Carrie brings credibility to the work, and she's been working to build that with Ling and the rest of the EGCI team and Max and his role and everything else. But when you layer in the budgetary consideration piece, that impact is real. And so I just want to be clear on the part of how we reached the recommendation we reached today is very much that consideration of, I don't have a good answer other than I would have to go back in the second year of the budget and make significant cuts to other parts of the budget to ensure that we are not unintentionally creating cost burden households while trying to build affordable housing. And I just want to acknowledge how important of a conversation that is. And at the policy level in the state of Minnesota, I just think it's important to raise. We have made affordable housing such an expensive thing to build that in the context of raising funds to try and help people have stable housing, we're making it hard to build affordable housing. And I would actually ask that the one piece that's not in here that I think about and in the legislative conversation, your role as leaders, one is we need your help in getting communities to feel comfortable, right? That's a role that we alone cannot carry. And the second part is advocating at the state that as they see the movement the organization here is taking toward a timeline that's well thought out and trusted, we need help, we need investment, we need policy change. There's so many spots where it allows for other help to come in, where I just think we need to ask.
And continuing to focus that on quality affordable housing because it is expensive. The levers aren't there necessarily that we need, and even so, we need to ensure that what we are investing in is that quality housing.
Manager, just to state the obvious, and I really appreciate County Manager's comments about legislation, and I know that actually Representative Houseman heading the Housing Committee actually has trusting Carrie and her team, and if we can get any proposals that I know this board would take us, stand in support of, we should, meet with her, at least we'd have her on board with what we want to do and see what we can do, so I'm just putting it out there.
I just want to highlight that we have about 12 minutes until noon, which is when we're scheduled.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the pieces that you talked about there, Ryan, was we've created a system where creating affordable housing is so expensive, right? That's why I was teasing out rent guarantees, barriers, next, felonies or unlawful detainers. Where are the areas, down payment assistance, but then do we go a little bit farther on how do we manage credit reports? Where are those areas where we can make affordable housing actually much more cheaper and be much more effective? So Trista, I agree with you. We got to be ready. That first dollars we collect, we know where it's going and it's getting out the door. But I also want to make sure we spend this time thinking about, how do we actually find ways to make affordable housing cheaper and just as effective, if not more effective, than kind of the traditional look back and how we've always done it versus how do we move forward. Because this is another opportunity where we haven't been in this game and we can bring a perspective to this when we're working on the visioning piece about not only where are the gaps in the cities, where can we strengthen where you don't have capacity, but where can we go in areas that you never were able to go before, because these areas are so present for you right now, you're putting every penny there. And we've got an opportunity that we can go in areas that have never been explored in this county, working with our citizens. And being ready for that day one, right?
Seems that if that is not, it definitely needs to be a part of the vision plan.
Oh, absolutely.
Commissioner
I think this also echoes, goes back to our conversation a couple weeks ago on our legislative platform, is that, we all need to make sure that we're advocating for additional resources and home and CDBG funds on the federal level, and to make sure that's on our platform as well as at the state level, knowing that our timeline is out, that we need to have that effort and work put in the front line to what fills the gaps in the meantime, or in addition to, as well as, I agree, looking at our policies and where can we strengthen communities or cities that are doing 4D programs or tax programs, and what does that really look like, so that we can, in the meantime, so I think that's part of the vision plan and the work plan to make sure that we're getting there.
Thank you. I'll go back to you.
This was just to kind of summarize our levy timing recommendations, and that was to see through the vision plan, really build up those relationships with exempt communities so that they can understand the value of any county HRA levy, and then review HRA levy impact, as county manager suggested, against the 2022-23 budget, and then seek EDA special legislation once we have an HRA levy impact and programs underway.
This has been a huge series of meetings that we've had this past year, leading to these recommendations. We've seen a lot of nods around the table, respectful of the staff recommendation. I wanted to ask what you need from us today in order to proceed, but also to check in first with commissioners around the table. I see Jim.
Well, I was just I think what you need is clear direction about staff recommendations being aggressive or something totally different. I'm really supportive of the staff recommendations. The one piece I would add to Trista's point on the visioning piece, as we're working with the cities, is let's start from kind of a broader perspective and what strengths we can bring to that visioning process working with the cities. In the end, if we end up with the same old to start, so be it. Let's try to start looking forward and broader than that. But I really, with all the sense of urgency, more faster, I see this is the path to success, and I would support this.
And so are there other comments from Jim?
Yeah, I would agree with the staff recommendation. I guess I would say the staff recommendation plus, and that plus would be the work for other resources from the state, the federal, right, and looking at policies where we can make adjustments to make it affordable. So I would say staff recommended plus my vote.
Okay. Any other pluses? Commissioner Ryan.
Well, and I think that's good for next year's, we have to work at building the trust, not just decide on January 1st, 2021 that, okay, now it's time to work on trust. So, but I do think we still have the funding that's coming up for the NOAA funding that's coming out of this year's budget. So, and that's, when did you say it was coming?
December 17th.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other comments? Just supported. Okay. Plus.
So it doesn't feel at all like entrenchment. It feels like having a solid plan to move forward on, continuing to move toward MPDA as we build trust based on our vision with our cities. So I want to say thank you on behalf of all of us for that concrete plan that you put before us. The nods around the table are to indicate that we are supportive of your plan plus. So we look forward to the opportunity to talk about the plan and the pluses.
Madam Chair, if I may just in closing, thank Carrie for the work she's done. I just want to say out loud here, the trust that has been rebuilt so far under Carrie's leadership is profound. And while we are not all the way to the end of that road, we have made significant progress there. And so I want to thank you and your team for everything you're doing.
I would echo that. People will come up to me that it's not a subject matter that is being discussed at the time, and talking about the work that's being done by Carrie and the team.
And that's what it takes to move forward.
Right.
Thank you so very much to all of
And,
you.
and any time that we can get Alice Hausman to really appreciate what the county's doing, we are happy about that. And Alice, Representative Hausman is appreciative of the work that we're doing on this, so I want to just keep her posted on that.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.
That was encouraging.